December of the year 2000, all around reigns complete darkness and an ominous silence, characteristic of the first hours of a deep, dark night. A cold winter mist envelops the American city of Tallahassee, creating a special, invisible veil through which only the icy breath of the wind breaks. Almost the entire city is still fast asleep, lulled by the warmth of cozy homes. But one man is already on his feet. His name is Mike Williams. He woke up long before the first rays of the sun, quietly packed his things, attached a small boat to a massive truck, and set off. Ahead of him lay a long journey to a huge lake called Seminole, located nearly 80 kilometers from his house. Mike was driving there to engage in what, after his own family, he loved most in the world: hunting wild ducks. This was supposed to be a special, festive day. That very evening, Mike and his wife Denise were going to celebrate the 6th anniversary of their wedding. They had big plans, reservations at a restaurant, evening outfits, the anticipation of a romantic dinner. It was the very milestone that symbolized 6 years of successful, mutual building of a happy life. Mike tenderly kissed his wife before leaving and confidently promised that he would return exactly at noon to have time to prepare for the holiday. But noon came and Mike was not there. An hour passed, then a second. The sun began to lean toward the sunset, and instead, anxiety in the house began to grow with incredible force. Mike's best friend, a man named Brian Winchester, along with his father, set out to search. They knew well every hidden bay of the lake where Mike usually placed his decoys. They went straight there and soon discovered his car, a large 1994 Ford Bronco, parked near a remote, marshy boat launch. Mike himself was nowhere to be found. A large-scale search began, but that very night a terrible winter storm hit the lake, and the rescue operation had to be stopped. The next day, a patrol helicopter spotted Mike's empty boat in the middle of the water. Inside lay his hunting rifle, neatly tucked into its case, untouched, but all around reigned a dead emptiness. The official investigation very quickly whipped up a theory convenient for everyone. Lake Seminole was created artificially, and beneath its water hid thousands of sharp remnants of trees from an old flooded orchard. Detectives declared that Mike had accidentally struck such a hidden stump with his boat, flew overboard, and his heavy fishing waders boots instantly filled with icy water, pulling him to the very bottom without a chance of rescue. Emergency workers assured the family that the body would definitely surface in 3 or 7 days, but the body did not appear in 7 days, nor in 7 weeks, nor in 7 months. And this is where the first anomalous fact appears, turning this case into something absolutely incredible. Over the 6 decades of this artificial reservoir's existence, about 80 people had drowned in its waters. 80 bodies, and absolutely all of them were found and returned to their families, all except one. The body of Mike Williams became the only exception in the history of the lake. How can an adult 31-year-old man weighing nearly 80 kilograms vanish without a trace in a closed body of water? Investigators had a shocking answer ready: alligators. They claimed that the predators found the body, tore it apart, and hid it forever in the underwater thickets. The case was quickly closed with a verdict of accidental death, but there was one person whose ancient maternal instinct screamed the opposite. Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, felt with every cell of her body that a terrible spectacle was being played out around her. Her intuition launched a bloody war against the system lasting 17 years, which ultimately ripped the mask off one of the coldest, vilest, and most terrifying betrayals in the history of forensics, because the real predator was not an alligator and it was not an accident. He was destroyed by those he boundlessly loved and trusted more than himself.
Two people who shared his bread and his bed. If this terrible picture of maternal loneliness against an indifferent state machine sparks a fire inside you, if your heart demands justice for a woman who was forced to believe a lie for so many years, stop right now and leave a comment under this video with just one word. Justice.
Because it was exactly this word that kept Cheryl Williams in this world when everyone around advised her to just accept it and forget. Jerry Michael Williams, whom everyone from childhood called simply Mike, was born on October 16, 1969. He grew up in a modest village in the north of Tallahassee. His family lived very poorly, but possessed what no money in the world can buy, an absolute readiness to sacrifice themselves for their children. Mike's father worked hard all his life as an intercity bus driver for the Greyhound Company, and his mother looked after other people's young children. They raised Mike and his older brother Nick in an ordinary, old long trailer on wheels. When the parents saved enough money to build a real brick house and finally move out of the trailer, they made an incredible decision. They gave up their own comfort and gave every penny to pay for their son's tuition at an elite private Christian school, securing them a ticket to a better future. And the children grew up clearly understanding this sacrifice. As a teenager, Mike worked night shifts in grocery supermarkets, unloading boxes, and during the day ran to classes. He graduated brilliantly, became the student council president, played American football, and showed incredible success. It was in the classrooms of this school, when he was only 15 years old, that the two main passions entered his life. The first was duck hunting, and the second was a beautiful classmate named Denise Morell. Remember this name, because this quiet girl from a religious family would later turn into the main director of the most terrifying nightmare in Mike's life. But back then, it was the pure first love of teenagers. After school, Mike entered Florida State University, where he studied political science and urban planning. He worked so hard that a well-known real estate appraisal company hired him even before he received his diploma. At his new job, Mike turned into a true legend. His supervisor would later say that Mike was the hardest working man he had ever met in his entire life. His work ethic was astonishing. Mike married Denise in 1994, and his desire to provide for his family became fanatical. He would come home, have dinner with his wife, wait for her to fall asleep, and in the middle of the night, return to the office to finish reports. This incredible labor bore colossal fruit. By the age of 31, the son of a bus driver from a trailer was earning more than $200,000 a year. He bought a huge, luxurious estate in an elite neighborhood of the city, completely resolving all the financial issues of his family, and in 1999, his only long-awaited daughter was born. Friends recall that Mike became the tenderest father in the world. He could drop any important meeting just to hold his baby in his arms. The year 2001 was supposed to be a time of new great achievements. 2 days before his disappearance, Mike happily told his mother that he and Denise were planning to have a second child, had already bought tickets for a luxury cruise to Hawaii, and were preparing for a trip to Jamaica. He had absolutely everything worth living for: wealth, love, a little daughter, the respect of society. And that is precisely why his sudden disappearance on a quiet lake did not fit into any logical framework. Why would a man who took safety with panicky seriousness, hid weapons in the office far away from his daughter, and always checked life jackets, suddenly make such a foolish mistake during an ordinary hunt? Something didn't add up. But this was only the beginning of a great wall of lies. The initial searches on Lake Seminole were conducted chaotically because no one assumed a criminal lead from the start. The case was filed as an ordinary disappearance of a hunter due to an accident. Rescuers focused on an area of the lake called the Field of Stumps. swamps. It was a frightening place where thousands of sharp remnants of trees from an old orchard stood underwater, which could easily pierce the bottom or throw a driver overboard. Official figures reassured the family, promising that the icy water was simply delaying the process of the body rising, but that would definitely appear. After 2 weeks of searching, rescuers found only a camouflage hunting hat in the water, but they could not prove it belonged to Mike, and in February, the operation was completely shut down. The final report stated that no signs of a disaster or death were found. And then appeared that very convenient alligator theory put forward by a private search firm. They stated that the reptiles had completely destroyed the body. Meanwhile, Mike's colleagues and friends began to notice very strange behavior from his young wife, Denise. While the entire Tallahassee community gathered on the shore of the lake, cried, prayed, and combed through every thicket, Denise never came to the lake even once. Her close friend recalled that this caused shock. When a plane crashes, relatives of the victims are ready to beg on their knees to be let near the site of the tragedy, just to be close to their loved ones, even if there are no chances. Denise did not feel this need. She strangely avoided cameras, kept her distance, and surprisingly quickly accepted that her husband was gone. She organized a lavish memorial service literally the day after the official cessation of the search, while Mike's mother was still screaming in pain and demanding to keep digging the earth. And 6 months after the disappearance, a real miracle happened. A random fisherman noticed a pair of fishing wader boots floating peacefully on the surface of the lake. Divers called to the scene recovered a light hunting jacket and a flashlight from the bottom directly beneath the boots. And in the jacket pocket lay an undamaged plastic wallet containing a hunting license with Mike Williams's clear signature. This looked like ironclad proof of a tragedy, but these items raised even more questions among experienced criminologists. There was not a single trace of alligator teeth on the rubber boots. The jacket had no damage whatsoever, and there was no characteristic silt or underwater algae on the items, which inevitably cover any object that has lain at the bottom of a lake for half a year. Furthermore, the flashlight turned on easily when an officer pressed the button. It created the impression that someone had just neatly brought these things and thrown them into the water the day before. But this was enough for the judge. Just a week after the find, at the official request of Denise Williams, Mike was officially declared dead due to an accident, and from that second, a gigantic financial mechanism was launched. Denise immediately filed documents with insurance companies and received payouts on her husband's life insurance policies totaling $1,500,000. And 5 years later, Denise married again. Stop here for a moment and think about who became her new husband. It was Brian Winchester, the very same best friend of Mike Williams, who was the first to go look for him at the lake, who was the first to find the empty boat, and who, a few months before Mike's disappearance, had personally sold him those very insurance policies for $1.5 million. The new couple quietly moved to live in that same luxurious estate that Mike had built, raised his daughter on his money,
And completely closed themselves off from any communication with the press. For the whole world, the story was over. But for Mike's mother, everything was just beginning.
If this story touched you, if the memory of the hardworking guy who was betrayed by those closest to him became at least a little bit important to you, share this video because every person who learns about the journey of Mike Williams is one more voice in defense of his name, one more step toward ensuring that such crimes never remain hidden under the shroud of time. Cheryl Williams looked at this lavish marriage of her former son-in-law and daughter-in-law, looked at the millions in their accounts, and knew with the absolute certainty of a mother's heart that her son had been murdered. She did not believe the alligator fairy tale for a single second. And when law enforcement officers, under the pressure of her daily phone calls, finally turned to real scientists, this convenient official theory shattered to pieces. Herpetologist experts who spend their lives studying reptiles gave an unambiguous conclusion. Alligators do not eat at all in winter. They are cold-blooded creatures. Their metabolism depends entirely on the temperature of the surrounding environment. On that fatal night in Florida, extreme frost reigned. The air temperature dropped to 7 degrees below zero. The water in the lake cooled to 8 degrees Celsius, and the shores were covered with ice for several meters. Under such conditions, alligators fall into a complete torpor. They do not hunt, do not move, and are unable to digest even a small fish, let alone an adult man. Moreover, biologists stated that even if some mythical crocodile had woken up in winter, it physically could not have destroyed a large body completely without leaving a single piece of clothing, bones, or traces of blood on the waders, and the items found 6 months later were in perfect condition. But the most important proof was brought by Mike's best hunting friend. He told detectives about the ironclad safety protocol that Mike followed religiously. Mike never, under any circumstances, wore heavy rubber fishing boots while operating a motorboat. This is the first rule of every hunter because if you fly into the water wearing waders, they instantly act as a heavy anchor and drag you to the bottom. Mike always operated the boat in light footwear and put the waders on only at the site, standing in the swamp. The fact that the items were found floating proved only one thing. They were planted there by people who did not know Mike's hunting subtleties. Back then, they did not yet know that a real hell, born of their own sin, was already beginning to unfold behind the walls of the beautiful Winchester estate. For 17 years, Cheryl Williams waged a war all alone against the whole world. She turned her small house, where she looked after children during the day, into a real headquarters for a private investigation. She spent all her modest funds to order large promotional billboards on highways, where she placed a photograph of her son with the inscription, "I was murdered. Help find the body." She constantly demanded that the police open new reviews. Relatives twirled fingers at their temples. Former daughter-in-law Denise forbade her from seeing her granddaughter, claiming that Cheryl had lost her mind from grief and was destroying the child's psyche. Detectives stopped picking up the phone when they saw her number on the screen. Then Cheryl made an incredible decision. She began to write one letter every single day addressed to the governor of Florida with a plea to appoint a special prosecutor. She wrote every single day. She sent more than 2,600 letters. 2,600 letters. It was an epic battle of one mother against a gigantic bureaucratic machine. And then she learned a terrible thing. The governor's secretary did not even open her envelopes, but simply forwarded them in batches back to that very same local police department she was complaining about, where they were filed away with the old closed case. Cheryl would later say that this slap in the face from the state hurt worse than a physical punch with a fist, but she did not stop. She kept writing. Convenient. Far too convenient it was for the killers to think that time had completely washed away their tracks. The new marriage of Denise and Brian, built on blood and money, lasted only 7 years. In 2012, serious scandals began between them, escalating into utter hatred. Brian began to be choked by a terrible paranoia. He understood perfectly well that the only thing keeping him free was Denise's silence. But when, in 2015, the woman officially filed for divorce and completely blocked his number, Brian lost his mind from fear. He realized that during the division of property or in a fit of rage, Denise might go to the prosecutor and turn him in to save herself. On August 5th, 2016, Denise left the house, got into her car, and drove toward work. Suddenly, through the rearview mirror, she noticed a man with a mask on his face climbing from the trunk space onto the back seat. It was Brian. He had hidden sheets, large pieces of plastic sheeting, a bottle of chemical chlorine bleach, and heavy tools in the car.
He pressed a gun to her head, shouting that she must follow his instructions. Denise displayed incredible composure. Instead of panicking, she calmly turned the steering wheel and drove into the parking lot of a very crowded pharmacy, stopping directly under the security cameras. Brian got scared, began to cry, claiming that he just wanted to kill himself in front of her eyes because he could not imagine life without her.
Denise promised that she would not tell the police anything if he got out of the car. He took his plastic and chlorine and fled. But as soon as the door closed behind him, Denise drove straight to the police station. Prosecutors quickly realized that Brian's set of items, the plastic, chlorine, tools, were intended not for suicide, but for the brutal murder of his ex-wife, followed by the destruction of evidence. Brian Winchester was arrested on charges of armed kidnapping and in 2017 was sentenced to 20 years of strict imprisonment. But this was only the beginning of the complete capitulation of darkness. Sitting in a cell and realizing that 2 decades behind bars awaited him, Brian grew even more terrified. He realized that now Denise was completely free. She had received all the money, gotten rid of him, and could easily pin the entire murder of Mike Williams on him alone. And then the best friend decided on the final betrayal. He called the investigators and offered them a full, detailed confession of Mike's murder in exchange for absolute judicial immunity from prosecution for this crime. What he told under the camera's recording made the whole country shudder. It turned out that their secret romance with Denise had begun back in 1997 when they constantly went on vacations as 2 married couples. They wanted to be together, but Denise's religious family categorically forbade divorce, considering it a terrible sin and a social stigma. Then the lovers decided that murdering the husband would be a much better and cleaner option, which would additionally bring in millions of dollars in insurance. They developed the plan for 9 months, sleeping in the same bed with Mike. Initially, Denise suggested drowning her husband in the ocean during a vacation, taking Brian's wife along as well to eliminate both interfering partners in one fell swoop. But Brian refused to kill the mother of his children. Then they settled on the idea of an accident during a duck hunt. On that fatal morning, Brian arrived at the lake together with Mike as his reliable companion. They rubbed out to the middle of the icy Lake Seminole, and Brian asked Mike to stand on the edge of the side to check the decoys, having previously persuaded him to put on the heavy waders. As soon as Mike turned his back, his best friend pushed him into the icy water with all his might. Brian calculated that the waders would instantly fill with water, and Mike would simply go to the bottom without unnecessary noise. But Mike turned out to be a real fighter. He did not drown. He managed to shed his heavy jacket, surfaced, swam to a large, flooded tree, and gripped its trunk tightly, breathing heavily and begging for help. Brian began to panic. He realized the plan had failed, and if Mike returned to the city, it would be the end. Then, the best friend turned the boat around, approached closer, pulled out his hunting rifle, aimed it at the face of Mike, who was looking at him from the water, and fired a single shot point blank. A single shot into the face of the one he grew up with since childhood. Before his death, Mike managed to see the face of absolute, pure betrayal. After that, Brian pulled the dead body out of the water, loaded it into his trunk, brought it back to the city, and buried it in deep mud near a forest stream where they often played in childhood. Then he returned home, changed his clothes, and calmly went with his wife to a family Christmas dinner, pretending that nothing had happened. The details discovered later during the excavations resembled scenes from a grim movie. Under escort, Brian Winchester led archaeologists and criminologists to the secret spot in the forest. Under the guise of exercises, city service workers brought in heavy excavators and dug deep 3-meter pits in the liquid coastal silt for 5 consecutive days, 16 hours a day, fighting venomous snakes and groundwater. On October 18, 2017, search dogs froze over one of the excavation pits. From the dense mud, the remains of Mike Williams were raised. Due to the complete absence of oxygen in the deep mud, his body was preserved almost ideally. At 98%, there were still hunting gloves on his hands and boots on his feet. A deoxyribonucleic acid test confirmed a full match with samples from his mother. Cheryl Williams brought her son home after 17 years of terrible oblivion. On May 8, 2018, Denise Williams was arrested right at her workplace at the university on the very day her daughter was celebrating her 19th birthday. A grand jury indicted her for first-degree murder orchestration and conspiracy. The trial lasted 4 days, and the main prosecution witness was Brian Winchester himself, who detailed the cold-bloodedness of his former lover. The jury deliberated for 8 hours and found Denise guilty on all counts. At the beginning of 2019, she was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2020, an appeals court slightly modified the sentence, throwing out the direct murder charge due to a lack of physical evidence of her presence at the lake, but upheld the conviction for conspiracy, sentencing her to 30 years in strict prison.